Let me begin by thanking the Global Youth Academy for inviting me to do this presentation to you. Um, it's a great pleasure to be a part of your meeting, and it would have been so much better to have been there personally. Um, South Africa, like all other university systems, really struggled through this pandemic, and we are still very much in the throes of the pandemic. The pandemic is still very much at the growth phase here in South Africa. And today, in fact, South Africa registered 92,000 cases of the pandemic, and so there's still a long way for us to go, and we're still very much at the phase where there's an exponential growth in the number of cases. Um, the university system shut down in the second week of March after cases of COVID-19 were identified at the University of Cape Town and at the University of Witwatersrand. And this resulted in a decision taken both by the university system itself and by the government to shut down the system and to try and ensure that the system um, went into a state of preparation, if you like, to deal with the pandemic. There were deep fears that the universities would become large incubators of the pandemic. Um, Clearly, the trajectory of the pandemic made it completely clear that there wouldn't be an early opening of the university system. And therefore, universities went into a planning phase to try and understand how they would complete the academic year. It needs to be made clear that the academic year in South Africa runs from January to December, which is different from what happens in other countries. And so we were still very much in the middle of the first semester that during which this shutdown took place. And so there was still a very substantial part of the academic year that had to be completed. The first challenge was to try and understand whether there was any capacity within our universities to move onto kind of an online platforms or some forms of emergency teaching that would use technology and so on. And while it became clear that some universities were in a very good position to continue in this vein, for other universities, it was quite clear that there would still be a lot of work to be done to be able to move into sort of online learning, if you like. To be fair, I think it needs to be understood that all 26 universities in South Africa had some form of preparation in this area. The problem was, in fact, that this had crept onto the universities so quickly that there just wasn't enough time for preparation. Um, Ultimately, it was decided that we would adopt a kind of a principled position that no student in South Africa, not a single student in the entire university system, would face the challenge of not being able to complete the academic year. The reason for this kind of principled approach was because South Africa itself is such an unequal society, and that the universities within it are indeed themselves unequal, and that we had a situation where there were interinstitutional differences and interinstitutional inequalities, but also that within a single institution there were students who could well afford to succeed with some form of online learning, whereas others just would not be able to do so. And the reasons for for students not being able to engage in online learning really came from four reasons. The first one was the issue around whether students had devices or not, um, laptops or tablets or whatever the case might be, whether students had access to data. This was a very significant issue. The third issue was whether students had connectivity where they were in their home locations. And fourthly, just the issue of whether the conditions at home would be suitable for students to engage in online learning. Um, and therefore, there was this very substantial kind of discussion about the development of what we call the multiple pathways to the completion of the academic year, but with the overriding factor that all 26 universities would find ways of ensuring that every student could complete the academic year, even if it meant that the academic year would be reconstituted, so that all, the entire 2 semesters would somehow be completed once the universities could go into kind of a face-to-face mode again, or a blended learning mode on campus again. And therefore, this multiple pathway approach evolved, and and some universities actually very quickly shifted into sort of online platforms and began to give their courses in online fashion, whereas others moved into other pathways, such as the delivery of materials to students, the use of devices, and so on. In all cases, these were really emergency teaching measures. These were not really properly constituted e-learning enterprises, and that's simply because the challenge was uh, so rapidly kind of unleashed on the universities. Um, I think it's fair to say that the other major challenge was indeed the preparation of academics to move into this online learning uh, platform, if you like. That too was a fairly major challenge, and, and and again, some universities were better prepared for this than others. Um, in the research terrain, it is very likely, in fact, that the there will be major cuts in the funding of research. We've already heard that the Department of Science and Innovation, which is one of the funders of research in South Africa, has received a 20% cut in budget for 2020. And what that means essentially is that uh, that this will have an enormous impact on the research enterprise and postgraduate enterprise in South Africa as we head into 2021. There are also indications that there will be severe budgetary cuts in 2021, and also deep concerns about students deregistering, and therefore, of course, expecting to receive tuition fee refunds and so on. And all of this places enormous strains on the universities as they head into the future. Um, Perhaps most importantly, I suppose, the is what can come out of the pandemic in helping us to think about new ways in which the universities may function in the future. And clearly, the capacity that will be developed during this period at all 26 universities in the area of online blended learning and so on will become an important factor. And I suppose the other thing is really the relationship between the universities and government, the universities and society more generally, and the impact that universities have had during this period on managing the pandemic and so on has been sterling, has been exceptional. And it's very likely, in fact, that this opportunity will help to strengthen the relationship between universities and society. What this pandemic has shown us is just how unequal our society is and just how unequal our university system is. And so there's also this very dire need for us to think about how we might constitute kind of a social justice kind of fabric, if you like, around which to think about the universities as a system, and to try and ensure that the capacity of the universities during this period is not weakened, to ensure that the students that are entering the labor market may do so in the best possible fashion, if you like. Fortunately, the Council on Higher Education, the university system itself, the government departments, and so on, are all working together on the issue of quality and so on. And so that might help to alleviate um, a kind of a dramatic kind of decline in quality during this period. Uh, with that, let me stop. It seems to me, at least, that it might be fair to say that the universities have experienced an extraordinary stress test during this period. And the big question really is whether they will be able to kind of develop the capacity to overcome these stresses and to emerge from this pandemic in a stronger fashion. Universities are essential social institutions. They are knowledge intensive. Society, democracies like South Africa require universities, and therefore it is critically important that these universities survive and enter the future in a confident fashion. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure being on this program of yours.